as a projected brand for what they're trying to do means you're looking at how they emote over time. If someone emotes and shows a lot of anger, we tend to call them a hothead, for instance. If they show a lot of sneering, they kind of come across as snidely whiplash. And it's hard for us to warm up to such a person. And so it's the projected brand personality that can come from the CEO. It can come from the spokesperson on the air. It can come from a brand icon, for instance. I'll give you a quick kind of fun example. I was in the grocery store, and I was looking at one of the packages, and I went, wow, General Mills has replaced Betty Crocker with a spoon. So I went home, I went online, I looked up all the old Betty Crockers, and over the last century plus, there have been 7 Betty Crockers, and never once in any of those did she ever smile.
Wow.
And I went, wow, wasn't she supposed to be the happy housewife? How could you never actually have her happy? And then I concluded that changing her into a spoon was probably okay, given the fact that she didn't have a smile on her face.
As long as she doesn't hit you with the spoon.
As long as she doesn't hit you with a spoon, yes.
Exactly. You did an article, and I don't remember where, but you will, and it was about Obama's facial expressions. I thought that was a great article. Do you remember the name of that article?
Well, I just posted one recently for Fox because Obama was famous during the presidential race talking about the bitter voters in small-town America. And although he has a great true smile, and it was very evident on the campaign trail, his and Huckabee's were the great true smiles of the 2008 race, Obama's not smiling a lot lately. He really used to project cool confidence, and now he's struggling to contain just basically being vexed. And as someone who wants to position himself as the great compromiser, you got to be careful if you're spewing venom and attacking liberal Democrats as being sanctimonious and Republicans as being hostage takers. That's a lot of scorched earth. Where are you going to stand?
But in his face, you did a lot about his face versus what he's saying. Do you remember that?
Yes. Well, for instance, he does have a great true smile, and the great true smile means that the muscle around the eye relaxes, is why you get the twinkle in the eye.
Right.
He was very careful as a campaigner not to overdo that and go into a fake kind of cheesy smile. There were other candidates who would hold a smile way too long. It's not natural. A smile is usually on and off the face within 4 seconds or less, or they would flash the smile onto their face and then it would suddenly disappear, which is not natural. On the other hand, Obama doesn't emote as much as you might think for a guy who positioned his campaign on hope. And he has a tendency to sometimes literally cock his head back and look down his nose at people. And he can show some contempt on his face.
I see that. I definitely see that.
Or he'll curl the upper lip in disgust. Or very recently, when he's really embittered and frustrated, he'll have what is called an upside down smile, where you push your chin upwards, and then the corners of the mouth are drooping down. And he's even kind of gotten, like a puffy lower lip because you're really exasperated and you got a tension that's playing across the lower lip. So he was pretty smooth as a campaigner, and as a president, he's a lot less smooth.
Do you feel that his brand, if you will, I know he's a political leader, but do you feel that Obama, the brand, is obvious to the people who love him and care about him and agree with him?
Well, the debate that's going on right now, and I listened carefully on NPR yesterday as they were talking about triangulation and whether he's going to pull off what Clinton was seeking to do and perhaps accomplished earlier. But then the question is, do people know where you're coming from ultimately? Is there an underlying value system? If you are endlessly pragmatic, then there's still a question whether you're FDR or Reagan or anybody else. How do people understand you? Who are you on the underlying basis, despite the tactical decisions you might make to make compromises and move an agenda forward? And it's the value proposition and the values that you have that really make people have an allegiance to you. And so I think that's the risk for him right now. So is the brand damaged? I would have to say that it is. Whether it's fatal will probably depend in part on how the economy does. To his benefit probably is the fact that a whole lot of politicians are not very good emotionally either. It was pretty devastating when I watched them all up close from both parties in 2008. There was only a small number of them that were frankly impressive. And a lot of them, I remember one who just was stone cold deaf when it came to talking to a voter. It was in Iowa, and he was like the worst listener I'd ever witnessed in my life. And I thought, how can you possibly get to the White House if you can't even hold a civil, engaging, reciprocal conversation with a voter who's a fan of yours?
It's interesting. It's almost like a paradox. A lot of the politicians have contempt for the public because they need them and they don't want to need them. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes there's this subconscious contempt, and you can see it.
You can see it all the time. It is the most common emotion, probably even more than anger, on the face of the politicians. Lieberman almost has contempt surgically implanted into his face, for instance. But he's not the only one. And it goes across the political spectrum. So whatever liabilities Obama is facing right now, they may not be fatal, in part because whoever he faces, presuming he's running again, may be really challenged to keep the contempt off their face.
All right. I have one question about the infamous Julian Assange and his face. What do you see there, and what is the brand of WikiLeaks translate to you, who's an expert in facial coding?
That is an excellent question, and I just the other day was trying to look at the photograph of him in the car in London when he surrendered.
Right.
And trying to understand what his expression was, but it wasn't well lit. The other days when I've looked at him, there's a disgust, which would make sense because I've often seen in progressives that the corners of the mouth will go down and out. It's a bitter expression. It makes perfect sense to a quote unquote green candidate who doesn't find the status quo acceptable.
Right.
Wants to change, because bitter as a feeling means bad taste, bad smell. I'm rejecting it. And the anger as an emotion means you're going to move, you're going to make something happen. Well, clearly to put out all of those leaks is trying to create a tidal wave. And we've seen now that there are people who are helping to attack the websites of those who are disavowing or disconnecting themselves from WikiLeaks, and it's turning into a gigantic internet battle, and it'll be fascinating. So it's clearly a rogue brand, and it does have a value system to it, whether people uniformly like it or dislike it. We know where the U.S. government would stand. For instance, they've been deeply embarrassed by some of the things that have been leaked, and people never forgive you for embarrassing them. Because then there's a social, not only is there your own personal feelings, there's a social dimension that I've been shamed in front of others, and it's deeply wounding. And so will the U.S. try to extradite him? Oh, I think so.
I think so, too. Martin Lindstrom, the author of Brand Sense and Brand Child, wrote some very nice things about you in the opening of the book. He says, Emotionomics leads the global business mindset into a new paradigm, one that demands and rewards sensory and emotional connections between the 21st century corporate entity and its consumers. Dan Hill's expertise guides business in securing the bonds of empathy that will drive commercial growth over the coming years. How is your work focused differently or similarly to Martin Lindstrom's? And have you read those books of his?
Oh, I have read his books. My first book was put out by John Wiley called Body of Truth, and it preceded a book that he then wrote on the sensory realm. And then I published Emotionomics, and he came back with the buying brain. And so, he's a very good popularizer, but I think he doesn't actually have a tool that allows him. If you look at both of these, the sensory and the emotional, no disrespect, but it kind of goes back to my comment about the woman at the big corporation who was threatened by my tool. I don't think Martin is a progressive thinker, and I don't think he was threatened by my tool. But if you look at his studies, particularly the earlier book on the senses, it's all based on rational data. Essentially asking people regarding how they react to sensory engagement with products and design. And people don't think they're feelings, they feel them. Now, in the latest book on the buying brain, he did...
was that his book or Pradeep's?
Yeah, no, Pradeep has published a book with the buying brain. I'm trying to remember, maybe I have the title wrong on Martin Lindstrom.
Yeah, that was Dr. Pradeep who wrote the buying brain.
Yeah, but there's also, let's see, what is Lindstrom's book